RISE is a local education-focused organization that really prides itself on connecting with community to hear feedback on how we can improve circumstances for students in our K-12 public education system. So I want you to give yourself an applause for being here this morning and for showing up. To improve, that shows that you want to make a difference in our offerings that we have for students. So thank you so much for being here. I just want to give you bear with me a few acknowledgments. First off to Kip Indy for hosting us today for this event. So Angie, thank you so much for opening your doors for our families to come in and for this to be a welcome and a safe space for us to host this event today. I also want to shout out the RISE team. So Ashley Thomas, Lily Brown, Dwayne Ingram, Alexander Narinda, all the full team that's here today, the organizing team, Veronica, Sherry, thank you so much for the work that you put into this event. So without giving shout out to Katrina Owens, who is the reason why we have this beautiful setup in here today. So thank you, Katrina, for the work. So not least our panelists who are here today, who are not getting paid to do this. Thank you for being here. So Susan Preble, we're going to hear from Susan shortly, a presentation on K-12 education, as well as some phenomenal panelists who are going to share about how the money flows. So that's what we're talking about today. How does the money flow in our public schools? How are schools funded? What are some of the funding disparities? But most of all, what do we do about it? So what do we do to make sure that there's equitable funding, which means that there's fair funding to the students that need it and deserve it the most? And the reason why this really hits home for me is because growing up in my K-12 education system, I realized very early on that my school was not funded like the other schools. My school did not look like the other schools. And I realized later on when my elementary school closed because of lack of funding, that there's an issue here with access. So what does that mean to have access to a well-funded school system so all students can learn and maximize their potential? So that's why this really hits home for me. That's why this hits home for the rest of the team. So thank you all so much for being here and getting plugged in. I'm going to hand it over to our first presenter, Susan Preble. Susan is an expert in K-12 budgets. She shared with me earlier that she gets joy from looking into and talking about K-12 finances. So you are really experiencing a gem in Susan and her expertise. So thank you, Susan, for being with us and sharing how the money flows in our
Here, I'm a total nerd about this stuff, so please excuse me if I get too crazy. Good morning, and thanks for coming on this beautiful day, the Dia de Lobos. So schools, at a high level, schools are funded by the state, which is where I work, and also by property taxes, which are local taxes, which I don't focus very much on, but I can tell you about the state funding, which is what I'll do now. So, this coming budget in January will be our next budget year. And the budget years are every 2 years, and that's when we fund all the schools from the state perspective. So we'll fund those for 2 years. Fiscal year starts July 1 and then ends the following June 30th. So overall, Indiana gets its revenue from different places. So the state general fund is the biggest portion, and that's state taxes. So sales tax, income tax, property tax, corporate income tax. Then we have some dedicated funds, which are like the fees you pay at the BMV. These are funds that are dedicated to a certain area. Then we also get federal money. Federal money we've had a lot of federal money in the last couple of years because of the federal stimulus programs with COVID and all of that. So this portion is unusually high, actually. And that will start to go down a little bit, I think.
Oops, sorry.
Can I get the next one, Lily? Sorry. That's okay. So the general fund, as I was saying, our three biggest sources of revenue account for 90% of the state budget. So sales tax is the biggest category of revenue, which is kind of unusual. Indiana's kind of unusual in that most states don't have such a big focus on sales tax, but we do. Then the next highest is individual income tax. These are the taxes that we all pay. And then corporate income tax is the next largest group. Then we have smaller taxes like cigarette and tobacco products taxes, alcohol taxes, gaming. If you go to casinos, we get a portion of that money. There are some other ones, but those are the big ones. So in the fiscal year that we're currently in, our revenues are about $18 billion for this fiscal year. Lily? So the state, we have to try to figure out how much revenue we're going to have in advance. So there's a committee that tries to forecast that revenue. I'm on that committee along with my counterparts in the other three political caucuses. And it's called a consensus, so we all have to agree on what we think the money will be. They also do a Medicaid forecast, which we're not a part of that piece of it, but that is a big part of the budget. Can I have the next one?
Oh, goodness.
So as you can see here, this pie chart shows where all the state general fund money goes. So for fiscal year 2022, you can see that K through 12 education is the biggest part of the budget. It's very important. It's what I spend most of my time on. And it's about, as you can see, a little over 40%. Higher education is about 11%. That's the money that we give to colleges for financial aid and operating expenses. And then we also have the Medicaid is the next biggest category for us. We also have other areas like public safety, economic development, all the other state agencies, transportation, and environment. So to get to the school funding, all schools, whether they're public school corporations or charter schools, they get a set amount, which is called the foundation amount per student. So the key here is that the funding for all schools from a state perspective is really based on how many students you have. So if you're a growing school, you get more money. If your enrollment is declining, you get less money. If your enrollment is steady, you're at a stable kind of situation. So the amount that we have set in the budget is for that per student foundation amount, which is what we call just the basic grant. It's about $6,000 per student. So as you'll see, there's more money that goes on top of that $6,000, but the basic foundation amount is the $6,000. Schools also get money for their students from complexity, special education, career and technical education, and honors diplomas. So that count of students is done twice a year, September and then in February. So the biggest, most important part of the formula is the foundation grant. And this is like I said, applies to all public schools. And that amount is set by the legislature. And I should say here that in our legislature, it's run by Republicans. They have the supermajority, so they determine these amounts, just to be clear. We are able to advocate and fight for more money for public education, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, we are not in charge at the moment. Maybe we will be someday, maybe. But so we do still really work hard to get as much money as we can for our schools, particularly traditional public schools, because that's where most of the kids are. About 92% of all children in Indiana go to what's called a traditional public school, and the rest go to charters, private schools, virtual charters. So 81% is made up of that foundation grant, which is what was that $6,000 amount. The next portion that's really, really important to me is the complexity grant. And this is based on every school's complexity index. And they measure that by looking at how many children are eating food stamps, TANF, or are in the foster care system. So in addition to that $6,000 that the schools get per student, this complexity grant is added on to that. I would say about complexity is really important for me because most of our schools are traditional public schools, and many of those schools have very high complexity indexes. So this is a really important way that we can drive more money to schools. And this has been a very kind of political football in the General Assembly. At one point, I remember we were spending over $1 billion on complexity index. And a decision was made by the Republicans to make a change. They basically didn't believe that we had that many low-income students in our state, which we actually do. So they changed the way it was measured. It used to be measured by free and reduced lunch. That was the measurement that was the way they calculated how many complex students each school had. They changed that for several reasons, and I do not want to get political here, that is not my job here at all. They changed it to look at the food stamps, the TANF, and the foster care. And what happened as a result was it meant that we were spending less money on complexity. So now we don't spend nearly what we were spending on complexity. And the problem with this is if you're a school that's losing enrollment, the complexity piece of the formula actually was a way to help you with your funding. And now that is not the case. It's not so much of a hedge against declining enrollment like it was before. So it also is interesting, they used to keep that complexity amount separate in the formula, and now it's rolled into that foundation grant. So when I am working on the budget, I always ask to have that number separated out so that I can see what that number is for our schools. For special education is also very important to us. Schools get another additional amount for special education, and that funding, there's a range in the funding, which I think you all have a handout that kind of shows. There's a range, so depending on a student's disability, how severe their disabilities are, they get more money. The schools will get more money for a student who has a severe disability versus a less severe disability like a communication disability or something like that. And I will say, there is often an overlap between special education and complexity, and by that I mean there are many students who have both, who are both complex and have special education needs. So this is a really important category and a way to drive money to schools. The other funding sources that schools receive are, there's a career and technical education grant. And again, this is based on the kind of class that you're taking. And it used to be, we only had a few categories of this grant, but now there are tons, like 11 or 12. And you get different amounts based on the kind of classes that the students are taking. We get, you also get an honors diploma grant, and this is much smaller. Schools get an additional bump if they have kids in honors programs. And the last big pot of money that does not go to traditional public schools, that is part of the formula, is the choice scholarships. Now this program we'll talk a little bit about later, but this is money that goes to private schools. This is money that comes out of public taxpayers' funds to go to private schools. And this is money that actually comes off the top of the funding that goes to schools. So before the public schools get their share, the voucher amount comes off that. So career and tech, as I was saying, I think, yeah, 11 categories is what we have now. And they're all about, these are classes that help to prepare students for the workforce and getting ready for careers. And that amount is $144 million a year. And I should say, these amounts I'm talking about are just for the year we're in currently. And so they have increased funding going to this category, both in terms of actual dollar amount and then also in terms of the kinds of courses that will be funded. The honors, as I was saying, is a much smaller category, so that's about $31 million. And the award, they do get another bump if the honors kids are also complex kids. Okay, the choice scholarship. So Indiana has the biggest voucher program in the country. It's grown a lot. I've been in my job since 2008, and so when it first started, it was pretty small. And the idea was, this started in Mitch Daniels' tenure, and the whole idea was if there were students in a failing school, the idea was that they should have a chance to go to another school. And so based on low income, you had to have a low income and you had to be going to a failing school. Then you could apply for this voucher scholarship, go to a private school. Let's see. So originally, yeah, there were only a couple of ways to get into the program originally, and now it's been expanded a great deal. So now you can, like, there are all kinds of ways now. Like, let's say if you had a choice scholarship the year before, you could go again. If you fit into the income eligibility requirement, you could apply for a scholarship. If you're a special education student, you could get a voucher if you were eligible income. So, for example, to show how big it's gotten, in fiscal year 2012, the budget had $16 million going to this program. And so in the current year, $277 million is going to the program, which is a lot of money. And when it first started, they had about 3,900 kids going, and now we've got 42,300 kids. And I think that number is projected to go to 46,000 in fiscal year 23. So I thought I would look at and then charters got a really decent increase as well. And then,
oh my gosh,
for next year, when we go from this year to next year, you'll see the traditional public increase is much lower, and choice is still the highest. So, in terms of total dollar amount, obviously traditional public schools get the most money because they have the overwhelming majority of kids. But from a increase in funding perspective, the choice schools are getting way more money, which we have a problem with. And, we, try to fight hard to keep money in the traditional public.
oh sorry.
Yes, that's it. I'm happy to take any questions if you have time.
Yeah.
Anybody have questions? No? Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here on this beautiful day. Thank you. I'm sorry, Jasmine has a question.
For the legislature,
In the legislature, if families wanted to get involved in the decision-making process for how the budget is set for public schools, what are some ways that they can do that?
That's a great question. The biggest thing I can say is to vote and to vote for people who are advocating for public education. That's the biggest thing you can do. And the other thing you can do is to talk to your legislators, whether or not they're from your party or not. So if you're a Democrat, but you're represented by a Republican legislator in the Senate or the House, please contact them, and they will listen to you. I mean, they really do respond to constituents, whether they're Republican or Democrat. So I know it's kind of intimidating to do that, but remember that they are working for you. You're supposed to be working for you. You all pay my salary, you pay the salaries of your representatives. So I really do encourage you to contact them. You can email them, you can write them a letter, you can ask to meet with them in person. And actually, this time of year is a good time of year because, especially since you're local, your legislators are local. So although we're not in session right now, they're less busy right now. So it is a good time to try to talk to them. And they really will listen to you, and you just really need to advocate for your schools and your kids, and they understand that. And they may not agree with what you want, but it's really, really important to express yourself and to advocate for your kids and for your schools and for your families. So that's the best advice I can give you.
So much. That was so incredible. Thank you, Susan.
Sure.
So how are you all feeling? A lot of information, right? A lot of information. But guess what? We don't have to walk out of here and feel like experts. We don't have to be experts. But what we do know is we know what our children deserve. We know what the children in our community deserve as far as funding and equity in schools. And so we work with what we know. So I'm excited about this next part of the program. And I am now going to introduce and welcome our panelists to join me in the front. First up, Weston Young, who's walking up. Weston has served as Chief Financial Officer of Indianapolis Public Schools since 2015. He has lived in IPS since 2002 and been an IPS parent since 2010. He has been striving for improved educational outcomes in the IPS boundary since 2003 through financial and operational leadership through education-related volunteer and professional activities. Next up, Andy, there's Andy Siebert. And is under his umbrella. KIPP Indy's Executive Director. Andy leads the day-to-day work for KIPP Indy's 3 schools in the Martindale-Brightwood neighborhood of Indianapolis. Andy spearheads organizational growth strategy and manages teams that oversee academics, operations, finance, talent, and external partnerships. He started his career in education, teaching 8th grade English language arts in the Indianapolis Public Schools District. And I have to say, I have an 8th grader. That is not the easiest thing. And at KIPP Indy College Prep Middle School. Personally, Andy loves reading, spending time with his wife, Brittany, and daughter, Haley. And then last, but certainly not least, Shapoya Ward. Been an educator and administrator since 2010. Before joining the Excel Center, she was a science teacher in the Indianapolis Public Schools and local charter school. And in 2017, she was a founding principal for Purdue Polytechnic High School Schweitzer Center in Inglewood. Currently, as Purdue Polytech has grown to multiple schools, she holds the position of Chief of School Operations at Purdue Polytechnic High School Network. Give all of our panelists a round of applause. I understand you all can have a seat. I understand that I forgot to introduce myself. I am Ashley Thomas. I am the Senior Director of Community Impact and Organizing with RISE in sorry, y'all. Community Impact and Organizing at RISE India. So, without further ado, we have questions. But what we're going to do is we're going to start off with allowing each of our panelists to take a minute to really talk about introducing yourself, something that wasn't in the bio, so that you can understand why they're passionate about conversations like this, and then why they believe community conversations about school funding are important. In any order?
Pass the mic.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here on such a great sunny day. Leslie Young. I am a parent. I have 3 kids. They attend 3 different schools in the city. A 3rd grader, a 5th grader, and a 10th grader. On this day, a couple of them are out and about, and I wish I could be there. But I'm very committed to finance. The stewardship of our resources in this city. And that's my job as the CFO for ITS. I worked for the board, which is an elected body. So Jasmine asked the question of how you can get involved in the future. Maybe some of you have seen the public comment times at ITS board meetings. But we also have community conversations that are happening. I encourage you to come to next Wednesday. So this coming Wednesday, Francis will be partnered. School 56, just a little bit away here from here. We're going to have a conversation about finance as well. So make it a fun week with finance. In your family and all involved. At the same time, Tuesday and Thursday, once a month, we have 2 board meetings. So you can come to the building where our board meeting is at 120 East Walnut Street. Indianapolis, Indiana, 4624. We've seen many people from RISE and other organizations advocating to the board. Again, representing taxpayers, representing residents, representing neighborhoods, representing you for how dollars should be used to benefit students. So I very much encourage you to attend Tuesday and Thursday, our board meetings. Watch online. Get involved in some fashion. I invite you to Wednesday night. I will be presenting at 10 there. So look forward to seeing you there.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Seibert. As actually shared, I proudly serve as the executive director for Tiffany Public Schools. And welcome to Tiffany Legacy High School. It's awesome to host this conversation this morning at our high school. And just wonderful to be with you all today. This topic is something that I'm personally very passionate about. So just really excited for this conversation. I was telling my 2-year-old this morning where I was going. She said, "Daddy, where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to have a conversation about schools and how they use their money." And she said, "Daddy's going to buy a school?" I said, "No, not quite." But it is fun to just be here with Shatoya, Weston, and Ashley, and you all. And I think at our heart, Tip Indy's work is deeply grounded in Martindale-Brightwood neighborhood. And we believe that at their best, schools can be a cornerstone in communities, can be an asset in a community. And that extends to how schools in communities use their funding. And at Convene, we deeply believe that families and parents and community members should be part of the process to shape how money is being used to ensure that it's directly impacting students and ensuring student success. And so really excited to have this conversation this morning. And again, it's just a privilege to be here.
And my name is Shatoya Ward, and I have not been in my position very long. And I see a parent back there. Hey, how you doing? So family principal since 2016. And just recently, in about January, I was able to take the position as chief of school operations. So, but luckily, I've been in education for a little under 20 years. And so I've been able to be around funding and what that looks like. And plus, the head of schools of Tiffany is Scott Betts. And if you know, he is part of the state board of education, and he has taught me well, but also have been in the forefront of making sure that our students have access to funding and coming to the community and asking what is best to be able to do that. And so I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited that you are here. What's important to me is when you're a student, from the time that they leave your house to the time that they step into a building, this is what the experience is about for a student. And that all is connected, directly connected to funding and how a school in the community uses those funds for your student experience. And so this is really important for me to be out here to answer questions, for you to get educated. And another thing, I'm sorry, I'm gonna say this too. So another thing, thank you for the presentation from the state. A little over 60% of funding for schools come from the state, but 25% of funding that comes to schools come from property taxes. And that means that's the local money that she was talking about, the local funding. That means that comes from where you live. And whether you're renting or whether you're owning, you're paying those taxes. So those tax dollars are going to the schools that's in your community. So it's really important that you are engaged in this conversation because you are literally paying for this education for your students. So thank you for coming out. And
Keep the mic. Can you all hear me? My voice carries. Yes. Okay. So, while you have the mic, can you share something that you learned about funding as a new administrator in this role now that you're in that you did not know before?
Okay, so awesome. I think the question that she asked is something that I learned about finances and funding for schools that I didn't know before this new role that I'm in. And I gotta say that the most important thing is for you to, I'm not sure what your name is, but the presentation she talked about, Susan? Awesome. She talked about how to engage in the conversation of funding. And she talked about, going to your representatives, calling them, sending letters, and setting out appointments, right? What's really important about that is you should read up on them. You should learn about them. Whether you believe in that, the way that they believe in or not, you need to read up on them because what they stand for is how they're going to vote. And if you don't know what they stand for, then you don't know what to fight for. Do you understand what I'm saying? So whether you agree with them or you're in the right party or, they're not in the party that you're in, you still need to educate yourself on who's actually doing the voting so you know who to fight for. So that's really important. And then the next thing that I learned is that all schools, although they're public, are not funded the same. And the reason why I say that, this is why property taxes are so important to me, is because I'm in the charter sector. Purdue Polytechnic High School is a charter school. Right now, you are sitting in the charter school. Kip, thank you so much. And charter schools do not receive any revenue from property taxes. So if you live in a community and your student goes to a charter school, they're not receiving the money that you are paying for in taxes, property taxes. That's the biggest thing I learned. Let me tell you what property taxes pay for. They pay for transportation, pays for facilities. And when I say facilities, like the repairs for facilities, they pay for technology, right? And so charter schools they're not receiving that funding. It is not part of their revenue stream. Now, I also want to say, I appreciate Indianapolis. Weston is here to represent them. We have an innovation agreement with Indianapolis Public Schools, and they do, the districts, traditional districts, do receive that funding, okay? And it's been nice to have a partnership. They've been able to share, I think there was a referendum that just passed and voted. And what that referendum is, what that means is it's asking you to raise taxes, property taxes, so that you can help with some of the purchasing, the repairs, and the salaries of staff, and they give you a whole list of where that money is going. And so when you voted to say, yes, we're going to pay a little bit more on our property so that our students can have better outcomes and they can have buildings and technologies and things of that sort. Originally, charter schools did not get that funding. Okay, so even though your property taxes increased and you were thinking that that was going to go to your community school to raise, to go towards those repairs of facilities and salaries of the teachers, charter schools did not receive that funding. So what we were able to do is work with IPS, and IPS was gracious enough to work with us, and they were able to share some of that money that you all voted for to go to the families and the kids of that charter community and the foundation schools. So what I absolutely love about IPS is they said, listen, they're not your students and our students, right? They say they're your students and my students. They said they're our students. And we are willing to invest in our students together as partnership with them. So property taxes are really important. I know 25% don't sound like a whole lot, but when you got a little over 60% going to the state and 25% coming from your property taxes, and only about 9 to 10% coming from federal grants, 25% is a big chunk of that funding.
No, actually, let me ask this. Now that Andrew is Mike, what data and community input does KIP use to decide how to spend its money? Then you can comment on some of what Toya mentioned about the individual.
Great, thanks. So the question again from Ashley was, what data and community input do we at KIP use to determine how we invest resources in our schools? And where I'd actually start is building off of where Shatoya left off around funding equity. And the presentation from Susan earlier, which was terrific, one of the things that she noted statewide was that 92% of students in the state attend traditional districts, which is true for the state. But it is not true for Indianapolis, where 50% of students in Center Township attend public charter schools. And it is not true for Black and Latinx families throughout the state who disproportionately attend public charter schools compared to the 92% of overall students that attend your districts. And so one of the things that I would just highlight from a data standpoint, and Shatoya's point about IPS's leadership on this point, I just can't underscore and highlight enough, is there's a kind of like buzzy term going around right now around racial equity and racial justice, as there should be. At KIP Indy, we deeply believe in pursuing racial equity in our community. And what we take that to mean is centering the perspectives of our students and families, amplifying our community strengths, and then advocating for communities and our students who, historically have been treated inequitably, especially from a resource standpoint. And so from a funding perspective, what I would say to build off Shatoya is that anybody that says they are for racial equity or for racial justice, whether it's a politician or a leader in a community, has to be for funding schools equitably, which means funding public charter schools at the same level that traditional districts are funded. That is an expression of racial equity when it comes to school funding. And so we believe in that deeply at KIP Indy. But to get back to Ash's other question in terms of community input and data, that's also an extension of our commitment to our community. We believe in listening to our community, listening to families, and using that input to shape how we invest our dollars. We have a monthly community council that is made up of leaders in the Martindale-Brightwood community. Our neighbors that you passed on the way in are the Edna Martin Christian Center. They are a cornerstone organization in the Martindale-Brightwood neighborhood. They've been here since 1940. They have a lot of representation both on our board of directors and community council. We get regular feedback from our community council on how we're funding our schools. We also get feedback from our families. So we have a family task force that is made up of parents and family members of our students that help lead our work. And we are listening to them on a regular basis in terms of our strategy to invest resources into our students' success. This building was built in 2018 and is a reflection of that approach. And so over really the past decade, we have been part of community conversations and specifically the quality of life planning for Martindale, Brightwood, and the broader Northeast side. And one of the things that came up time and time again was the desire from families in the neighborhood for a high quality high school. And so we took that input, worked with the Edmund Christian Center. They actually gifted us the land that this building was built on, which then gave us the ability and flexibility to finance this facility, build it from the ground up in a way that was in direct partnership with both the community and our students. And so our students and community picked out like the flooring in this room. They picked out and gave us input on everything from our mascot to the spaces that we've invested in here. And I think that's just one example of our commitment to community input. But the last thing I would just highlight here is that really seeking that feedback from families and from the community can't be a one-time thing and then we check a box. It has to be an ongoing conversation where we're every year going back and saying, here's how we have funded our schools and what we spent the money on. Here's what we think really worked last year. Here's maybe some things that we could have done better and we needed to shift strategy. What do you think? What do you want us to spend money on? Take that feedback ongoing and consistently be committed to listening and responding.
So that actually was a perfect transition because when I met Weston for the first time in person, I mentioned to him I had seen some incredible presentations that I walked out of at IBS board meetings over the years. And I'm like, I haven't met you, but I had seen you presenting financial data. And he's like, what's your personal life like? Hilarious, you know? And the thing is as parents and community members, we don't have to walk out of those meetings understanding everything. You don't have to walk out of this meeting understanding everything, but you bite off and you understand. You work to understand a little bit more every time on how you can best support your kids' schools, right? And so that was a perfect transition for Weston. So during your time within IPS, what are some of the trends that you've seen in Indiana school funding, some of the flow of dollars coming into IPS, and then also chiming into some of the things that you've heard around like equity when it comes to funding in schools and some of the presentations that you've made around pivots that IPS has made in that regard.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Shatoya. Andy, for the partnership. Thanks for recognizing that. At the same time, we have a lot of challenges and opportunities ahead. Fiscally, financially, we are at a time where we need to have good reporting. We need to have good financial reporting. There's more money that schools have right now than ever before because of federal stimulus. Okay? So where COVID-19 impacted Shatoya's schools, Andy's schools, and we can spend hours talking about the impact of that. We have to come back and say, so what? We have your kid, my kid, or she's 5, she's 8, she's gonna be 18, she needs a checkbook. At some point, there's more money in the system than ever before. So collectively as a community, people are paying property taxes, people are raising, what's that money go to? Maybe people just filed a tax return. People are saying, what's that money go for? Susan did a good job of saying, hey, here's how the state gets some money, right? Local property taxes, state, and federal. Okay? So the way I see it is that the trends are this. Indianapolis as a whole is getting less poor. Okay? Indianapolis as a whole is getting less poor. Neighborhoods are changing. The neighborhoods of 2010 are not, they don't look the same. There's new houses, there's new people, hopefully there's new sidewalks, right? There's people biking maybe differently, more kids, less kids, etc. On and on and on. The demographics have shifted and changed in the IPS boundary, okay? Irrespective of schools. So with that has come greater valuation, so increase of wealth for the property that is there, okay? That property, the state and the feds, those monies from the feds are lessening as well. Why? Because of the demographics in our neighborhoods. Shatoya schools, Annie schools, all of the IPS schools are lowering funding by the federal dollars because the poverty is decreasing, at least in the data that's used to generate those funds. So what that means is that each of these schools has to then look to the state to say, are you going to fill in the gaps? So we heard Susan share what's happening. Schools are systematically, gradually becoming funded equally and equitably. Okay, so next year, so next school year, not this school year, next school year, a kid at Purdue Polytech, a kid at Tip Indy, a kid at any of the 60 or 70 programs of IPS, and all the kids in Kokomo, all the kids in Carmel, all the kids in Du Bois County, Evansville, you name it, wherever they are in Indiana, everybody gets $240 more. Everybody, every kid. Is that right? Every kid gets $240 more. But there's differences that each kid have. So kids over here versus there may need more resources. One may need less resources. Okay? That is an example of the trend that we've seen at the state, is that they've taken what is given, well, this kid needs this much, this kid needs this much, and they're literally saying every kid needs the same. And I see people here who probably have kids. If you have 3 kids, like I do, is every kid the same? I see some heads shaking off. So when you are asked to go vote with the mindset and advocate for equity. If the state doesn't see IPS in the Indianapolis area in the way that we think it should be, they're not going to cover the gaps that Shatoya School has, Andy School has, and IPS schools. Again, Shatoya mentioned the relationship like this. Little monogram. It's an IPS school, in my opinion. Kid, an IPS school, okay? There are kids. IPS is the boundary kids. You've got to figure this out. So if the feds are they're gonna lower the dollars, the state's gonna lower the dollars, who's gonna pick up the tab? Does anybody want to raise their hand? Because at some point what they're talking about is locally, we have to. Okay? Now, people are talking about operating referendum. Okay? There was a lot of work that went into that. Okay? Many of you probably voted for it. Hope you voted yes. Thank you. Thank you. What we're trying to do is do right with the dollars that were given to us. Now, right now, there's about $36 million in this year's budget that I'm budgeting to give towards compensation. And the board voted to voluntarily provide those dollars to charter partners. Okay? If Ashley says she has no social life and she's watching my graphs and charts, what you will see is that money runs out. Okay? The money runs out. So, $500 per pupil, is that equitable? I don't see people shaking. Okay? So something we have to figure out, okay, how do we take all the dollars coming into the population for IPS? Federal, state, local, and figure out that, okay, here's the needs here, here's needs there, and we as a community align on that. Okay? You've got to have adults in the room, you gotta figure it out. So that's the next 4 years, 2026, those monies went out. $36 million right now that goes to 31,000 kids. Those monies run out, what do? We, the local community, do. That's an important question up there for myself to consider, because the charts, the cash goes down. I'm guaranteeing you, I looked at it, Andy said, hey, Andy has had his accountant said, hey, send that report to Weston. But you know what? I'm kind of that guy. I would probably love to see it. Look at it for 10 minutes, and I guarantee you, Andy, Shatoya, they're thinking about what do we do when this runs out? Okay? Yeah. So I'm thinking about it from maybe a larger number perspective, but it's the same question we're all trying to answer. How do we align federal, state, and local resources to get the kid that's at Equitable High, that lives over here, my daughter, here, there, everywhere. The trend is this, again, remind, IPS demographics are getting less poor. And in the next legislative session, expect less funding from the state. That's what I would say at this point.
Thank you so much, Weston, and Andy and Shatoya. I just want to add a little color and get us ready for a breakout groups where we're going to huddle together. And the reason why we're going to do this, and I'm encouraging our panelists, if you have time to just stay and join either of these groups, just to listen to what the parents and community have to say. I think it's so important when we talk about topics like this, that if we are not the experts, we don't have to be as parents. I'm a mother of 3, 2 of my babies are sitting right up front. And my babies, actually my 2 youngest attend an IPS innovation school. And so I protect IPS and that innovation school, which is PLA 93. It's important for us to know that parents have an important part and community play an important role in funding. And we can influence folks on all levels. So we can influence folks that are talking about funding on the federal level, the state level, the district level, the school level. And it's important for us to know and be aware that we have that power. And if you believe that we have that power, I need you to shout out, we have it.
We have it.
Oh, okay now. Don't platform, because that was a little weak. So if you believe that you have and we have that power, I want you to scream from the rooftop, we have it.
We have it.
I love it. Yes, yes. And so it's important when they're saying we have to talk to legislators, we have to do this. And sometimes it can be really intimidating, but we have the power to be in the room with every single one of those individuals, and we have more right because they have to listen to us. It's us. They're making decisions for our babies. We know what our babies need, right? Do you know any elected officials that know what your babies need in your household every day? Now, unless you marry one, don't raise your hand. Okay, I don't know if anybody, I'm just saying. But if they don't know, then we have to share that information with them. They need to hear that from us. So what we're about to do is we're gonna break out in breakout groups right now. Look at your ticket. You should have all received the ticket when you first came in. That's your raffle ticket too.
Giveaway ticket. Giveaway ticket.
Yeah. Oh, it's your giveaway ticket. The red ticket. You should have a number on the back. Raise your tickets up if you have your tickets. Okay. So you should have a number on the back. Group number 1 will be over in this corner. So we're going to just kind of huddle and have a little area over here. Group number 1. Group number 2 is going to be in this back corner over here. The dad with the short sleeve shirt on. Can you raise your hand? That's where, yeah, Mark. Okay, raise your hand. That's where group number 2 is going to be. We're going to put group number 3 up here in the middle section, right here. And we're gonna put group number 4 over on the side over here. So if you have a number 4, then you're gonna come over here. You have a number 3, you're gonna come right here. You have a 1 or a 2, and 5, you're gonna go outside to that general area. To the comfortable seats, may I add. You're gonna be back out there. And there's gonna be a facilitator that's gonna dive deeper within this conversation to make sure that you can share, how do you think more parents and community can get involved? What do you think our role looks like? And let's get creative, because we have to move together. And I always tell folks, when I move, you move. It's just like that. So when I move, you move.
Just like that.
You know what? I don't know if I'm gonna ask for crowd participation again. When I move, you move.
Just like that.